Appreciate the time just to get together, and I'm sure some people will be very interested. You and I both get a bird's eye view into companies, right? Me on the
Mhm.
legal side, you in kind of the talent space, and so I think between the two of us, we get to see a lot of trends, business
Mhm.
trends that maybe other people don't see who are just kind of in their business day to day. Anyway, first question, just starting out for those of you that. For people that don't know you, would love to hear a little bit more just about your story, yourself, and kind of how you got into what you're doing.
Sure. Well, first off, thanks for having me. I value you as a friend and a trusted resource here in the business community, and so I'm grateful to be chatting with you today. Yeah, so I'm born and raised here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Is my home. I get calls, talk to candidates all the time, and they're amazed that I grew up here in sleepy little Raleigh. But my wife's also from Raleigh. We're natives. We grew up not knowing each other very well, but grew up 2 miles apart. Now we have 3 kids, and life is full, and it's challenging and abundant, and running a search firm as well on top of that. So life's full of adventure. um
Tell us about your firm. I know you just launched and how you got
Sure.
into that, what you're doing for business owners.
Yeah, so I launched Andrew's Executive Search officially January 1st of this year. I've been in the search business for uh about 8 years. Prior to that, I spent uh 15 years in the financial services and real estate development world. Uh, Funny enough, always kind of in a people connector type role.
Yeah.
And I was interested in executive search. When I was in college, I went to NC State. I didn't even know that executive search was a profession you would make a living in. I think I was drawn to it by just my personality nature. I love investigating. I love solving a puzzle, and I love connecting people. Executive search is kind of the intersection between, as you said, a bird's eye view into business strategy, meeting with business owners, but also seeing a gap in their business. Typically, in my case, a people gap or a talent gap, and helping solve that gap. So I really enjoy the work. I founded our firm. We are a retained search executive search firm. We do full end to end search, which means when I take on a search from the very first meeting with the client, typically on site to where they work, I get to see their operations, meets their team, to every candidate interaction, to negotiations with candidates, all the way to the very end. Every step of the process is run by myself. So it's a high touch, customer service experience driven to solve a unique need, not just to fill a seat.
Tell me about the client base you're working with, either by revenue or employee size. Is there a kind of ideal client for you?
Sure. I work across industries. To me, that's important. There's a lot of search firms that specialize, and there's a place for that as well. But I value getting to know business leaders in different industries and having candidly a candidate pool that I can touch from different industries. Not to get into the weeds, but contractually with my clients, like I won't recruit from my own clients. That would not be good. But if you only live in one lane or one industry and you work in a few small markets or a few markets, you're eventually going to start polluting your talent pool. So I think it's important to work across industries. My typical client is typically a privately held company. Sometimes it's a PE-backed operating company. In that case, the client's the PE firm. Family-owned, oftentimes multi-generation family-owned companies, faith-driven, mission-driven companies. I tend to stay away from my corporate world. Think big Fortune 500 companies. That's not my lane. It's not my network. Candidly, it's not necessarily who I work well with.
Mm.
You asked about revenue wise. I've worked with entrepreneurial growing companies, probably as small as 20 people and 10 to 15 million in revenue, up to I think my largest client is about 750 million in revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd say that sweet spot is probably 25 million to 250 million in revenue.
Obviously, we're in the same demographic at some level. There's some differences, but definitely some overlap there in terms of the family-owned businesses, the size, kind of the faith mission component. I count you as a really valued referral partner, center of influence. I really value, again, bird's eye view into a lot of different companies. That's probably what most people want to hear about is, you get to see in all these different companies, you have a pulse on talent. One of the
Mhm.
things that I talk to clients about regularly is one of their major concerns is talent. And it's not just on the legal compliance side, it's just how do I get good people? How do I afford good people? How do I retain good people? So, what trends are you seeing in the space from your seat?
That's a great question. I think a moving candidate pool. One, we're in the Raleigh market. I tend to work in Raleigh. I've got clients in Charlotte market, some clients in Tennessee, Virginia, South Carolina. So Mid-Atlantic, a lot of people moving here. So I think there's a trend to think that because there's so much talent moving, that it's gonna be easy to, post and pray is kinda what I say. Post a
Mm.
position, pray you get the right person. There are a lot of people moving here, there's certainly, I think the uptick in number of calls I get from candidates, kinda raising their hand and saying, "Hey, I'm in San Francisco," or "I'm in, Milwaukee, and my wife and I are, we wanna move to the Carolinas." I think the number of those calls, I don't know if it's just because 'cause I've been in the market longer, been doing it a little bit longer, but the number of those calls has ticked up. And I think there's just a trend and there's so many tools out there, that there's a lot of noise. A lot of candidates, a lot of tools, and people wanna, I think, more tools to faster hiring. And in my experience, my clients that make the most meaningful, impactful hires, they actually hire slowly.
Yeah, looking back at my entrepreneurial journey, and I hired quickly and fired slowly, and I think you should
Yes.
do the exact opposite.
Yeah. It can be frustrating to candidates, especially when
Yeah.
they go through a lot of times they've never worked through an executive search firm. They might have just been hired by the actual employer in the past, and so it is an added amount of interview steps in the process. So that can be new to candidates, but it does help stretch the process out, and it really kind of holds a business owner or a CEO or whoever the hiring decision maker is. It puts a governor on them to not just act on impulse. Which sometimes
Yeah.
that's right. Sometimes impulse gets you the right person, but not always.
And I've actually never thought about, I mean, you're right, there's so many people moving here. We live here, we understand how great it is, but the word's kinda gotten out, so the stats about the number of people moving to the triangle is really kind of eye-popping, but I haven't thought about it in context that it might make business owners think, "Well, I've got AI, I've got all these people moving here, why do I need, a Smith or a retained
Sure.
search firm?" Then I guess my other question is there an inflection point when I think about bookkeeping and accounting from 1 to 5 million or 1 to 10 million, they might have outsourced accounting, but then when they get to 10 million, they bring it in-house. Is there an inflection point for a company where retained search makes sense? Because the way that your fees are structured, they're not inexpensive, just like
Sure, sure.
and so, if I can go out and hire the $200,000 person with no fee, great. And if I've done that for a while, that's my history. Where do why do you get to a point where you're like, okay, there's enough pain, enough time here that I'm gonna go hire a firm?
There's several answers to that in several circumstances. So not everyone's the same, but sometimes there's just scar tissue. You made bad hires before and you're kind of at the end of your rope and you're willing to hire a partner to help you through that process. Or you don't have the capability or the resources or the time. You're busy running a business, no matter what that business might be. You don't have time to source 100 plus candidates or interview those candidates and compare them. So time is just is an easy reason why. And then just when it comes to the cost, in my opinion, there is an inflection point where it's a combination of time and quality of talent. So oftentimes that entrepreneur or that business owner is lacking in time. And so they often will hire just who's available or who was referred to them within their own network. So tapping into a bigger network and really then judging those candidates from an unbiased perspective. Who's the right candidate for the job, not just who was the best available. And then last thing I'll say on retained versus non-retained. For me, and my clients have found retained search is different from staffing. So staffing and recruiting, you know, they get put together in the same category. So there's a difference between retained search and staffing. Staffing is more high volume. Retained search creates a high level of accountability towards a mutually aligned goal. So when my clients put me on retainer, there is an extreme amount of accountability that I place on myself and our firm to
Right.
get it right.
In that context, do you feel like you're in the boardroom, so to speak, in the C-suite? So it's not just putting names and faces and LinkedIn profiles in front of the people for them to make the decision. You're obviously sourcing candidates, but then are you also in those discussions, pushing and pulling in the C-suite, making sure there's no blind spots to make sure they end up with the right person?
For sure. So I'd say that I'm on the same side of the table as they are, and then we're comparing and contrasting candidates, and we do a lot of research on our candidates. We put full candidate reports together. Typically, our aim is to have a slate of finalists, anywhere from 3 to 6 finalist candidates that the client, should they hire any one of those, would be a great long-term hire. Does that always work out? No, sometimes it's such a unique role. We might be recruiting for a very, very niche position in a small rural town in Eastern North Carolina, and the reality is they hire me because they literally can't find anybody. A win is literally finding 2 good quality candidates that are willing to move to that town that are in their comp range that have the skill sets and fit the culture. So it could be a different goal depending on the location, the uniqueness of the search.
I hear lots of stories from my clients, but also have my own entrepreneurial journey as you do. And the whole time factor is so interesting to me. Lawyers obviously bill by the hour. So you're always, even at home, sometimes I'm like, man, I could pay somebody to do this thing that I'm doing at X dollars an hour and I can go bill at Y dollars. Like I said, so it's interesting to me, particularly because business is not static. Business owners and their companies are always changing. So I think there's a point where you're a small company and then you wake up one day and you don't really realize it, but you're a larger company now. From what used to be straight bottom line, I'm going to do everything myself. And now you've got a C-suite and you need to hire professionals and lawyers and people like you to go do the things. I mean, do you see that transition amongst your client base?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Great client that I'll enjoy working with. Size of their business is probably smaller compared to most of the other clients I work with, but it was a startup, entrepreneurial guy that founded a business and woke up 12 years later with a really solid, healthy business, had people needs, talent needs, hiring needs, realized that the resources he was relying on were not getting it done in order to help them grow to the next step. And so at that point, it was, hey, let's just figure out what are your pain points. Like it didn't even start as a job description. It started out over a coffee and a breakfast, and just listening to him talk about where his pain points were.
Yeah.
And then we went to work on, gosh, probably over a few months of just discussing, the need of the role, and crafted a position profile out of that. And again, that was probably at the time a 9 or $10 million revenue business, not a C-suite type, leadership team. It was a business owner, and but those are so much fun to work with. I've now done 2 more searches for them, and they're not C-suite roles, but
Mhm.
oftentimes it's a role that's just critical to the owner or the leadership team. And every role is critical. What I mean by critical is on a day-to-day basis, they're interacting with that person. They need to have a great personality fit because they
Mhm.
interact so much. It could be a controller for a $10 million revenue business. That's not what you think of when you think of executive search, but
Mm.
controller might be the most common search I've ever I work on is we do that role. We do that search all the time.
I feel like anecdotally from my seat, I've seen the the tenure window of C-suite candidates or maybe EVPs and up, whatever you wanna call, whatever senior level people
Sure.
it just not like it used to be. Very rarely do you see someone for 30 years. Very rarely do you see someone in one spot for, like, 7 years or 5 years.
It's
It
kinda
didn't
like
feel like
college sports today.
it didn't feel like it used to be that way. Is that something that you're seeing, and how do you deal with that on the economics of the business model and then the client expectations?
That's a great question. No, none of my clients, they don't wanna see a resume where someone's jumped from place to place and they've got 7 or 8 different employers over a 12-year span.
I should actually wanna stop there for a second because I think that's right. I don't think employees think that way, though, or otherwise they wouldn't move all the time.
That's true, yeah. And I think a lot of employees think it's unfair to be judged because every story is unique, and there are
That's right.
cases where there are plenty of cases. So,
Sure.
I have to be careful. I'm working for my clients. I'm not
Right.
working for the candidates. The client is who's paying the fee,
Right.
and my job is for them. But I do have want to take extreme care of candidates.
Sure.
So it's their livelihood. So I try to understand their story. So I ask them in great detail to walk me through their career. Why did you choose to study what you did in school and walk me through your career? Go from place to place and explain to me why you left. And so we try to investigate those stories because it is way more common where you're now trying to understand why this person, spent 2 years here, 2 years there, 9 months there, and 3 years there. It seems more common where a 3-year employment is starting to feel like, oh, that was a long stint. That
Right.
was three
Right.
years
Yeah.
versus 15 or 20. Um, so that's where the whole process of working on the search all the way through the search and not handing it off. So one of my things is no handoffs. I don't hand off candidate calls, candidate interviews to anybody. And you get to know a candidate's story by being on every single call and getting to know every candidate. And that's how you can interpret between, is this person really telling me, did they have AI create their resume? Are they really telling me an honest story about their career background and why they left from place to place to place? And in my opinion, that's how you really, really are able
Right.
to judge the quality of the candidate you're talking to.
What's a misconception that business owners have about your industry and what you do?
One is we touched on staffing and recruiting are two different things, but I would say the most common thing I try to explain to my clients is, and those that have worked with me for multiple searches know this, executive recruiters don't have a drawer of quality candidates just waiting for us to call them about a job. 90% of the candidates that I place are passive candidates that are off working and doing a great job where they are, and I interrupt their life with a unique opportunity. Now, do I have candidates? I've been doing this for 8 years. Do I have candidates that I know have raised their hand and say, hey, if you get
Mhm.
this type of role, call me? Yes, we absolutely do. So I would tell you that it's a misconception that, hey, you hire us, then day one, we have 5 candidates that are just sitting around waiting for me to call. I think that's a common misconception is that candidates are just sitting around waiting for us to place them. The reality is, when I take on a new search, say it's a CFO search, do I have a drawer in my CRM? Do I have candidates, CFO candidates? Yes, they're in there. The reality is, 9 times out of 10, the candidate that we end up placing after going through a full search process is not one of the candidates that was
Right.
in my
Right.
head initially.
Yeah, it makes all the sense in the world with AI, with LinkedIn becoming making networking so much easier. It would be hard for me as a business owner to think about paying a fee if you're just placing that person out of the door. But I am willing to pay the fee if it's the latter, right? And so I believe you when you say 90% of the placements are in that second category, and that sounds like a whole heck of a lot of work, right? 'Cause you're pinging them out of the blue, you're convinced, talking to them about the opportunity, getting to know them, see if you like and trust them, whether it's worth putting your name behind it to put that person in front of your.
That's right. And we create a marketing piece for the role. So the search process, typically in my search process is going to take 60 to 90 days. And my clients sign up for that. They know that. They oftentimes are doing their annual planning, knowing they're going to make a key hire. And they let me know that. If you need to put a fire out and hire somebody yesterday, I'm typically not the person to hire
Mhm.
because I like to stick to a process. I want to see the candidate that we place. I want to see them working there 10, 15 years from now.
What does a good hire actually look like for you when you're in the C-suite helping them make those decisions? What does a good hire look like beyond simply just skills and experience?
A good hire for me, honestly, it means that the client is well satisfied. It solved a critical need and their business moves forward almost from day one. Like that person is plug and play. They fit the culture. Obviously, they fit the skill sets and they get along. They work well together. They mesh with the team. And that you often don't know that until 6 months, a year in. And oftentimes I hear it most from obviously the clients. If they hire me again, then we did a good job. And we have a great track record of being hired for multiple searches. But even though I work for the clients, you often hear that a great hire is made. You often hear that from the candidate. You've really changed their life. You're
Mhm.
working for the client, but you end up I love keeping up with candidates that I've placed
Right.
that are grateful and thankful and making impact, that's changing their family dynamics. That's tons of fun. You get to a point in business where your client just expects you to do the work and you're not doing it for the affirmation, but the affirmation also oftentimes comes from the candidate that you placed. So that's a roundabout way of answering your question. A great hire, they're obviously going to make impact and they're going to be there for a while. Sometimes you limit the amount of searches you can do because you hire them for a junior level role and they grow into the future CFO. I joke with my clients sometimes, like, "Hey, this person is going to be a good CFO one day." They're like, "Yeah, that's one less search we're going to have to hire you for." I'm like, "Yep, that's right."
That's great. I use the Patrick Lencioni hungry, humble, smart matrix a
Yeah,
lot back in the old Forrest firm days. And I probably hired, I don't know, 75 people or so over 10 years. And I look back, my batting average was lower than I wish it would have been. But I think it's so hard to score people in just a limited interview process.
yeah,
I felt like I know so much after 30 days, but you don't get the benefit of a look under the hood for 30 days before you make the decision. And so that hungry, humble, smart matrix made a lot of sense to me because it doesn't jump off the LinkedIn profile, it doesn't jump off the
mhm,
resume. It's hard to pick up in a 30-minute interview, but you can start to get a feel for intellect. You can get a feel for how hungry or not they are and how humble they are or not. And also the reason I love that is because there's so many examples of people that I can think of, right, like that were really smart and maybe not that humble or not that hungry or vice versa, right? You got to have all three to kind of be that ideal
that's
team
right.
player.
It's funny, candidates don't know this because back to the whole staffing, recruiting, misconceptions about who does what. Candidates treat us, being the recruiter, one way that oftentimes than they do when they feel like they're now in front of.
Right.
And oftentimes they don't realize that I do retained search work and that I am
Yes. Yeah.
on the same side of the table. And after
Right.
my interview, I'm calling up the CEO and debriefing about that person. And so that's why it's important, every little phone call. Like if they are treating me poorly, that tells me about their character. And I'm not saying I deserve to be treated I'm important. I'm just that's a thing that can be lost. Because everyone's gonna suck up to the hiring manager or whoever the person making the decisions are. And oftentimes, James, I have a gut feeling after, and it turns out often to be true. Like I have a gut feeling when I'm just after one phone call with a candidate or after their second interview, and I always interview them face to face. I have a gut feeling like I think this is the guy they're going to hire or the gal they're going to hire. But I try not to say that. I want the process to play out. But
Sure. Yeah.
I'm sure that when you hired all those people for the Forrest firm, and that's hard hiring lawyers. I don't do lawyers. I don't do the CPA firm wants me to hire young accountants. I don't generally do that. What you did is that's really hard work.
I appreciate you saying that. You don't really realize it when you're in it, but looking back, yeah, that was something. I mean, there was a couple years there where I was a full time recruiter. It felt like,
Yeah.
not really practicing law, but anyway, the good old days. All right, a couple last questions, man. We'll land the plane here. Talk to me about timing. What's the ideal time frame to like think about a position? Let's just take a C-suite position. Is that
Okay.
a 3 month thing, a 12-month thing, something in the middle? And like, where are the guardrails? I need to fill a spot in 30 days. Okay, that feels really fast. What mistakes
Mhm.
can we make? And then what's like the other end of the spectrum where people are like super conservative? They're like on the top of the diving board, but won't jump in the pool. And they've had the position out like 18 months, you know?
Yeah, I'd say timing wise, if it's a brand new client that I've never worked with, we spend a little bit more time on the front end. So, understanding culture, dynamics of the leadership team. Um, but whether it's a financial controller or a general manager, a division manager, or a CFO, or a head of HR, or a general counsel, our process is the same. 60 to 100 days, we can execute a thorough search. And that first 1 to 2 weeks when I say the first 1 to 2 weeks, that means they've agreed to a search and we've kicked it off. I'd say before you get to that point, a lot of my customers are in either C12 or they use EOS or they have some type of system where they're helping make decisions. And oftentimes I'm involved in those conversations 6 months to a year before we do a search. You got to pay attention to things like when are bonuses paid out. When are you more likely to increase your candidate pool? Fall can be a tricky time to do a search because bonuses are paid in January or March and candidates don't want to lose out on that money. And oftentimes, if they want to jump, you got to be willing to help offset that. So there's all types of variables. But I try to stick to that 60 to 90, 70 to 100 days is really the threshold. Do searches go longer than 100 days? Absolutely, they do.
Hmm.
And my clients are comfortable with that. They want to get the right hire, not just a hire.
I was always surprised in the back end of what the cost was to unwind a bad hire.
Yeah.
Just always more than I expected for sure. So that makes some sense to me.
Yeah.
All right. So let's say 100 business owners are listening to this or more. What's like one practical thing they can do today to bolster on the hiring front?
Have clear success metrics for your candidates, whether you're using me or not, whether you're hiring on your own, be able to answer to candidates what success looks like in the first year.
Okay.
Oftentimes they've got a job description that measures out what the job is.
Right.
I would say success measures and the growth trajectory for the person that's in that role. So in today's world, candidates are interviewing companies just as much as they're being interviewed by the company. So have a clear path of growth for that individual. And if they
Hmm.
hit those success metrics, and I build those into our position profiles. So we don't use job descriptions. We use a position profile that's going to have information on the company, the growth trajectory for the person that's hired into this role, in addition to the job skill sets and expertise you're looking for.
All right, I'm gonna throw a couple bonus questions at you. You're fresh entrepreneur.
Okay.
You get a bird's eye view into all these different businesses. I'm sure you've read a lot of books, but what's like one thing that comes to mind of this new window of entrepreneurship where you're like, wow, I didn't realize it was really like that?
Uh, I would say juggling business development and all the hats I got to wear as a business owner. When you run a full desk search firm, I'm laser focused on these searches. It's hard to then step back and go back into I need to go find business mode.
You're not alone in that. I mean, having, talked to a lot of founders and business owners and then having done it myself, I think you're right. I think this probably is the biggest challenge. That plus the work-life balance piece. We can,
Yeah,
the whole thing because it all rests on you.
yeah,
And because there's so many hats to wear, you never feel like you're doing them all well. That's a very normal
sure.
thing. Even if you are doing them all well, there are a lot of hats to wear. Big corporate America job, you know, you wear 1, maybe 2 hats. Now
Yeah.
you're wearing 40.
Right, right.
So it's hard for a successful person like you to, think you're doing well at all of them, even though you probably actually are. Tell me about the picture on the back wall, the golfing picture there. I know your family's into golf. You play some golf. You got kids that play golf. I'd love to hear more about
Yeah.
that.
I'm also coaching the middle school golf team at our at the school, so,
Go Tigers.
yeah, that's right. That's a picture of Sam Snead. I got to go to the Greenbrier when I was a kid, and most people, young golfers, they don't really know who Sam Snead is, but he's a legend. The Greenbrier used to be, I don't know if they still do it, but used to be famous for having a distinguished former PGA Tour pro on site as their resident pro.
Yeah.
And Sam Snead was there at that time. He had a golf cart, and his golden retriever would sit in the golf cart with him, and he'd drive around. He was the head pro, and so I went in and bought that poster when I was like 12 and went out and found him and asked him to sign it for me. Yeah.
Well, thanks for doing this, man. I appreciate our relationship. You've been a great referral partner. Thank you for trusting us with those on the legal front, and hope it's been the same, vice versa, on the talent front for you all. Appreciate our friendship and the relationship, and appreciate you giving us a little time.
James, I appreciate you giving me a little spotlight. You're very kind with your time, and I appreciate you being interested in our business.